We'll open our service this morning with a poem. The words are in the chat if you want to follow along. The poem is by Jeremy Friedman, who wrote it in celebration of the Shemitah. The Shemitah was described in Leviticus 25 as a sabbatical year, celebrated every 7 years, and as it happens, begins tomorrow evening with Rosh Hashanah. The Torah tells us of the sabbatical year, the Shemitah, when work ceases for people and beasts, not something we often hear in our work-driven culture here. But once a year, we read the portion which tells of the 7th Shemitah year, every half-century, which is a jubilee when slaves go free. Of course, we don't have sabbatical years nowadays, and we don't have slaves except to the extent that we're slaves to work, status, addiction, and among us, some are oppressed and wrongfully imprisoned. But this year is different from all other years, because in differing degrees, right now, many of us are enduring forced sabbatical months until businesses and other places reopen. These unusual times leave it to us to ask ourselves, has this virus-imposed shutdown allowed us to recalibrate at all in a constructive manner? Here we engaged in productive revitalization. Have we engaged in productive revitalization and self-discovery, or are we just in a hurry to race back to work and worry? Our speaker today, Rabbi David Seidenberg, agreed to speak to us at the last minute when the director of the Abundance Farm, Rabbi Jacob Fine, who I've known for quite a long time, suffered a concussion and found it difficult to focus or spend time on Zoom. So we appreciate Rabbi Seidenberg's willingness to fill in at the last minute. Rabbi David Seidenberg is the creator of NeoHasid.org and Shmita, and is Shemitah scholar in residence and moss gardener. Hope we'll hear about the moss gardening at Abundance Farm in Northampton. David is also the author of Kabbalah and Ecology, God's Image in the More Than Human World, and was ordained by both Jewish Theological Seminary and Reb Zalman Schachter Shalome, the founder of Jewish Renewal. He teaches around the world on Judaism and issues of ecology, animal rights, and human rights. He's been studying and writing about the Shemitah for close to 40 years. Rabbi Seidenberg's presentation this morning is titled, You Shall Release the Land, the Radical Theology at the Heart of Shemitah, Sabbatical Year, and the Abundance Farm.
There's a lot to talk about with Shemitah, the sabbatical year. I'm going to first do a few biblical texts with you all. And at some point, I might throw these texts up on the screen for you as well. Right now, I'm just going to read from them. So here is the text from Leviticus 25, which is the main picture of Shemitah, of the sabbatical year that we get. 6 years you will sow your land and gather your produce, and the 7th you will release. The word in Hebrew is tishmetena, and forswear, this is Exodus 23. This is the first mention of Shemitah, and then the next one will be Leviticus 25. So you will release tishmetena and forswear, or let go of, and the poor of your people will eat, and the remainder, the animal of the field will eat. That's the first mention in Exodus 23. And then here's Leviticus 25. Adonai spoke. Adonai is our name for God, Yud-He Vav-He. It's the substitute name we use when we don't want to say what sometimes gets pronounced as Yahweh, which is a sacred name to us. So I'll use the other word that we use normally. Adonai spoke to Moshe in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to Israel's children and say unto them, You will come to the land which I give you, and the land will stop, will have a rest, Shaftah, Adonai's Shabbat, the Lord's Shabbat, you might translate it as. In the 7th year, the Sabbath it will be for the land, a Sabbath for Adonai. Don't sow your field and don't prune your vineyard. And the Shabbat of the land, whatever grows in the Shabbat year, will be for you for eating, for you and for your male and female servant and your hired worker and your settler who lives as a stranger with you. That would mean like refugees and immigrants. And for your beast and for the animal which is in your land, the wild animal, all of her produce will be to eat. And if you do all this, the land will give her fruit and you will eat to be satisfied. But the land you may not sell permanently. For the land is mine, for you are only strangers and settlers. Again, settlers can mean refugees, immigrants, but not people who possess the land. for you are strangers and settlers with me. Gerim v'toshavim atem imadi is how you say that in Hebrew. So in all the land of your tribe possessions, redemption you will give to the land. So we have a few things to note here. First, the Sabbath is a Sabbath for God and a Sabbath for the land equally. It's not primarily a Sabbath for human beings, although we do get a kind of Sabbath if we're not working the land, if we're not doing agricultural work for the year. A second thing to notice is that the food that grows in the land by itself is for everyone, and everyone includes the animals, as including the wild animals. So we're going to a state of being when the difference between human and animal is not so great anymore. And the rabbis understood this, that if the wild animals need to be able to eat the food, then that means you have to open your gates in the sabbatical year so that animals can go freely in and out of your fields. The promise of doing this is that that is how you have peace. That's how the land is fruitful, and that's how you live securely. And then the last point about this, which I really should give you a little bit more context for. Let me see your faces again. I wasn't looking at your faces just now. Okay. Every seventh sabbatical year is called the Jubilee. I wonder if that's related to jubilarians. Maybe it is. Yes. And in the seventh sabbatical year, all land sales from the past 50 years are canceled. And everything goes back to the way it was 50 years before. So the way the world starts, the way the society is established according to this model of the world, is that you start out by equally distributing the land to every family in the entire nation, in the entire people. And over 50 years, some people might lose their land entirely. And some people might amass, 2, 3, 10 times as much land as they started out with. But in the 50th year, the seventh year, the seventh Shemitah year, all those transactions are canceled and everyone goes back to having an equal portion of land. So I don't think I need even to explain very much to say how radical this is. The idea that human beings don't own the land at all, that the only way to justly own land, and own has to go in quotes, is that it should be distributed equally to all the families, and that there is an inalienable right for each family to go back to its land, that no one can ever be alienated from their land permanently. It's a grand vision of the world, a grand vision of a society which is radically rooted in justice, radically rooted in the idea that humans don't own anything, that we belong to the land does not belong to us, that we belong to God does not belong to us. I know most people won't say God belongs to us, but that's how we treat God most of the time in our churches and synagogues and mosques and such. So that's the basic picture of what Shemitah is. There's one more picture to add to this, which is at some point in Israelite society, the needs of resting, of having a sabbatical year, shifted from being agricultural to being financial. So that in Deuteronomy 15, we have a different picture of the sabbatical year, which says that in the sabbatical year, and according to the rabbis and as apparently the text, depending on how you read it, that at the very end of the sabbatical year, all debts from the previous 7 years are canceled, annulled. So not only do we have people going back to a radical equality in terms of land ownership, again with ownership in quotes, but also a radical equality in terms of their economic status in relationship to each other. So this first equality, the radical land redistribution, happens only once every 7th sabbatical year. But the radical redistribution of or canceling of debts, which enables equality of economic status, that happens every 7 years. And in fact, although the Shemitah of the land is not observed in any full way anymore and hasn't been for more than 2,000 years, the Shemitah of debts is still observed. And in fact, the rabbis understood that when the Jewish people were not living as a nation in a covenant with God, they understood that the land covenant could no longer be fulfilled. So even with the state of Israel, that's not the same thing as the people being in the right covenantal relationship with God. So even now, the Shemitah of the land is not fully observed in Israel, although in some places it is. But the Shemitah of debts is observed everywhere, at least in theory. There's more to say about that, which I'm not going to say right now because it will make you confused. So let's go on a little bit further here. What is this whole picture of the world that we're talking about? What you need to understand Shemitah on a deeper level, of course, you can understand it on the political level, on the economic level, no problem. It's hard to imagine how a society could arrange itself to be able to actually perform a Shemitah, but we can understand what it means. But to understand the theology, the depth of what's going on here, you really need to go back to the beginning, to Bereshit, to Genesis. And what is important to know is that the story of the whole book of Genesis, all the way up until Abraham, is a story of the degeneration of humanity's relationship to God, simultaneous with the degeneration of the humanity's relationship to the land itself, to the earth. So that at each stage of the stories, first there's the Garden of Eden, then there's what people call the fall, the going out of Garden of Eden, then there's Cain and Abel, then there's various other stories culminating in the flood. And in each of these stories, the relationship is getting worse and worse and worse. And as we see at the end of the story of the flood in Genesis 9, God says at the end of making a covenant. Now, the covenant in Genesis 9 is not with humanity, it's with all living beings, specifically with all animals, and humans do not have a special place in that covenant. And the thing that's said afterwards is what makes it clear. God says, I will not add any more to cursing the ground for the sake of humanity. In other words, I'm not going to bring any punishment on the whole earth just because humanity is so rotten, if you can think of it that way. So in essence, what God is saying at the end of the flood story is, I give up on trying to make a relationship work out between humanity and the earth. And so I'm not going to try anymore. I'm going to stop. There's a little more to say about this, because when we have the fall from the garden, the so-called fall, that's not the language that we use in Judaism, but I know it's the language that's used in the Christian and post-Christian world. When they leave the garden, God says in the curses that are given to humanity, right? God says to Adam, cursed is the ground for your sake, which can mean different things, but as I understand it, it means that the ground, because humanity is going to be lowered in its level, the ground is also going to be lowered in its level so that humanity and the earth can stay in a relationship of some kind of equality. And that's borne out because the very next thing that happens after they leave the garden is that God takes the human and puts them in the ground they were taken from. So you may not have noticed when you read the second chapter of Genesis, but humanity is not created in the Garden of Eden. Humanity is taken from a place where it's created and then brought into the Garden of Eden. When they're let out of the Garden of Eden, they're not expelled to wander willy-nilly in pain and horror and not knowing where they're going to go next. They're put specifically in a place that they should find love and compassion in, which is the place that's the very earth that they're made out of, right? And as we know, that doesn't work out either, because then Cain spills Abel, and God says, the blood of your brother is screaming to me from the ground. Because you, Cain, killed your brother Abel, you are cursed away from the ground. So the first idea of curse, the ground is cursed with humanity so that they stay in equality. The second case with Cain, God says, cursed are you away from the face of the ground. And Cain says, I can't bear the punishment because I'm going to be hidden from your face and I'm going to be expelled from the face of the earth as well. That's the state of humanity that we're coming into when Abraham appears on the scene. A state where God has given up on the relationship between humans and the earth. And essentially the entire Torah is about this idea that God thought, and because this is our mythology, right? But God thought here's a good fellow, Avraham, and his good family with Sarai and everyone else that he brought along with him. And here's this good land, Canaan. And I'm going to put the two together, and I'm going to tell them how to make a right relationship with the earth. And they'll do it right. It will all work out beautifully. And everyone else will look at that model of that people in that land and say, oh, isn't that beautiful? We want to be like that too. And through that means the entire human earth relationship would be rectified. That was the vision. And the culmination of that vision is the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year, which tells us how that relationship looks, how it's managed, how it unfolds. As you all know, that didn't work out, right? The model was never really created. It's not clear to what extent that the ancient Israelites actually observed the sabbatical year. We know they observed it enough for the Romans to make fun of them for not working for a whole year. So somebody did it somehow because the Romans made fun of it. But we don't know if they ever practiced radical land redistribution, for example. There's all kinds of aspects of this that we don't know if it was ever practiced. So the model that was supposed to have been created didn't come into being. And then the people was exiled from the land. So that ruined the chance of it ever happening. I don't need to tell you probably that it's not happening in modern Israel as either, right? So we can go into that if you want to in questions, but we'll see what you want to talk about. The bottom line is we had a mission, the Jewish people, or I should say the Israelites who evolved into the Jewish people, because they're not really the same thing. We had a mission to show humanity a different path than the one that civilization has actually taken. So the Anthropocene, what we call the Anthropocene, this era, this geological era of humanity controlling the systems of the earth and modifying and degrading those systems. It was already understood in the ancient world that such a thing was possible. It was already understood by some peoples, including the ancient Israelites, and not only the ancient Israelites, that a different path needed to be taken. And the Shemitah year is the model of an agriculture that doesn't take the path that our world has taken. An agriculture in which we belong to the land does not belong to us. An agriculture which is based on equality between human beings, which is also based on equality between humans and the other animals. And also, very significantly, equality between the citizen and the stranger, between the citizen and the refugee and the immigrant. So these three axes of equality are the vision of the world that was supposed to become. That's the reason why there's a Torah. That's the reason why there was ever a covenant. And here we are today, trying to figure out how to get back to that. So that's the first part of what I want to say. There's so much more to say about it. John, I forgot to turn on my stopwatch when I started talking. How many minutes am I into this?
You've gone in 15.
Okay, so we'll say a few more things. So we have Jewish people around the world. Now, this is the third Shemitah year where people are paying attention around the world to what Shemitah is. And the third Shemitah in a row where we have actually Jewish farms all over the place popping up to try to carry out some kind of vision of agricultural justice. And Abundance Farm is one of those places that's in Northampton, next to Congregation B'nai Israel. So all of us are trying to figure out in this Shemitah year, really for the first time, how are we going to observe this Shemitah, which first of all, was only officially observed in the land of Canaan, Palestine, Israel. And secondly, it doesn't sound very practical. Leave your gates open for the whole year. Don't work any of your land. So all of us are trying to figure out how can we remember the Shemitah in some practice, even if we're not going to do the whole thing, because you need a whole society to support the practice of a whole Shemitah. You can't do it as just one farm, right? So that's been an ongoing conversation for the past 6 months, even longer, at Abundance Farm. And some of the things we've come to are that we're going to leave the gates open for the animals to go in and out. The times for pick your own, when people could come to the farm, used to be specific times. And for this coming year, you can come to the farm anytime you want to get anything you want. So that's another shift, again, reflecting the Shemitah idea. And then although this contradicts the direct meaning of Shemitah, it aligns with the spirit. Abundance Farm is going to be giving out fruit trees for people to plant, with the idea that if we plant fruit trees now, in the next Shemitah year, 7 years from now, we'll be able to eat those fruits without having to work the land. Because one of the things about Shemitah is that it really pushes you towards creating fruit agriculture instead of annual agriculture, because you want plants and trees that will give fruit even when you're not cultivating them. And that's really fruit trees. So those are 3 of the things that Abundance Farm is doing in memory of, in observance of, in remembrance of the future of how we'll observe Shemitah. I'll stop there and ask you to give me any questions or comments if you'd like, and then I can say a little bit more, and then we'll move on with the next part of the service. Thank you. So unmute yourself if you want to say something. Go ahead. Pete, you had a hand up?
Yeah, I just wondered about how Abundance Farm is trying to follow the financial, economic spirit.
We've been talking about that and haven't decided what to do yet about that particular question, particularly because Abundance Farm is not really a financial institution. It doesn't incur debts. It doesn't hold debts. So what could we do? One of the ideas we talked about but haven't decided yet about implementing is to create a fund that would go towards indigenous peoples and Black farmers to support their purchase of lands, which is a kind of memory of the returning of the land to its original owners. Mm-hmm. Or returning the land to people who have had their land taken away from them, as happened to many Black farmers over quite a long time. So that's an idea that's being experimented with. It's not clear whether it belongs under the framework of the farm or whether it should have a different framework. There is a what is the word? The word is escaping me. For reparations, that's the word. There's a reparations committee at CBI talking about some of these issues. So it probably fits under the reparations committee of the Tikkun Olam, of the Repairing the World wing of CBI. So that's still under discussion. Good question, though.
Thank you.
It also seems like members of CBI might choose to take this symbolically and represent it in their own backyards. Is that happening?
Yeah, that is also a suggestion, to have people specifically invite everyone to come harvest what's growing in their yards, for example, and to leave their own gardens open. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we already do that to some degree because Abundance Farm makes these signs. They say shared abundance, and they invite people to put them in their own personal gardens to invite people. So it's already happened. And it will be something that gets also more emphasized in the Shemitah year. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if your farm is essentially a CSA, or is it a farm that's set up for your congregation? And do your members work it and then harvest it, or how?
It's neither of those quite. There's like a flower CSA to get flowers for the Sabbath, for example. That's a very small part of it. But the Abundance Farm has an alliance with the Survival Center, which is across the parking lot from the synagogue. And so clients of the Survival Center are invited to come pick their own food and also to help with the farming. The farm employs 2 farmers, actually, who manage the actual crops and planting and tell people like me what to do when they want us to do something, for example. Except for the moss garden, that's like my little thing. But besides that, yeah. Did that answer your question? And there's pick your own. So it's not a production farm. It's not a farm that is designed to try to make money from its crops. It's mainly a community resource and also an educational resource for the school, Lander Grinspoon Academy, that is also sharing the same parking lot as the synagogue and also next to the Survival Center. Survival Center is the food pantry. I'm guessing you all know that, but I'm not sure.
Hi.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I mean, how do you feel about, let's say, the animals that come onto your farm, like rabbits and things like that? Are you sort of kindly to them? I mean, do you try to keep them out? What do you?
Well, normally there's a fence.
Right.
It is around the whole farm and the gates are closed. So we keep them out. Yes. But in the sabbatical year, we're talking about letting them in. And that may turn out to be something we do for the whole year. And it may turn out to be something that we do for part of the year and then stop doing because it's not working well. It's not certain how that's going to go. We're in a kind of experimental phase with it. We're going to have a ritual opening of the gates in October to commemorate this idea, to sort of publicly make a statement and get people involved with it. And where it will go from there, you should ask me in 6 months, or actually ask Jacob, because he'll be more. I'm the scholar in residence, so I don't make any decisions about how the farm is run. I just help them by giving them liturgy when they want liturgy and teaching classes when they want me to teach classes, that kind of thing. Yeah. So Jacob or the two farmers, Rose or Rebecca or Neely, the educator, will also be making those decisions. Yeah.
Groundhogs are a terrible thing, so good luck with that.
Yeah. The truth is, though, I mean, a groundhog can dig under a fence. It's not that hard.
Under your house.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure that happens already.
What do the children do there?
They have all kinds of programs that happen there. They plant things, they harvest things, they talk about the relationship of agriculture to the Jewish holidays. So one thing that you may not realize, so the New Year happens in the fall. The reason why it happens in the fall and is starting tomorrow is because on the new moon, on the full moon, we celebrate Sukkot, which is the beginning of praying for rain, because the rainy season in the land of Canaan, Palestine, Israel, goes from Sukkot, which is, in the next full moon, till Passover, basically. And so that's the time of the greatest danger, because if the rain doesn't fall in that time period, and if the right amount of rain doesn't fall, then agriculture is ruined for the whole year. And famine is staring people in the face. Yeah, at least it would have been in ancient times where they weren't pumping water from aquifers. So the intensity of prayer now is about purifying ourselves so that we can be ready and listen to when we ask for rain in the holiday of Sukkot. Not a lot of Jews know that, but that's actually the reason why this is the beginning of the year. According to the Torah, it's the 7th month of the calendar, not the 1st month, but we still call it the New Year for that reason.
7th month is July.
So the 7th month is the month of Tishrei, which is the one that's beginning. The 1st month is the month of Nisan, which is the month of Passover in the Torah's calendar. And in the calendar that we use in common in the Hebrew ritual calendar, nowadays, Tishrei is like the 1st month, the one that's about to start. It starts on the new moon, which is tomorrow. All our months go by the moon, of course. Did you all know that? Yeah. What else? Anything? What I can do is share with you. Actually, John, should I pause now, or should I do one more thing? What do you tell me?
One more thing, briefly.
Okay, I'll share with you one of the liturgies that I've written for the farm, which I think is, well, let me make sure the right window is open. Okay, let's see. Is that looking right? Does it say intention for harvest?
We're seeing
Yeah, are
outline.
you all seeing what I think you should be seeing?
We're seeing outline. What is Shemitah? Definition. 2 Shemitas.
Oh, no, that's not what you should be seeing. Hang on, I shared the wrong thing. Hang on again. Okay, the right thing is open there. Let's see if I can get it right this time. It looks like it should be this one here. How's that? Intention for harvesting?
That's it.
All right, good. I think you'll have a sense of what's going on here now that I've told you a little bit about what Shemitah is. So here's the kavanah, which means intention. It's a prayer of intention to set the mood of what you're about to do. Right. This is what this kind of prayer does. So here's what we're using this year in the farm. In this year of Shemitah, we acknowledge that everything the land brings forth, she provides for all creatures, free to all, belonging to none but the Creator. May we receive in gratitude what God has created and the earth has ripened. May we lift our faces toward the land and her creatures, and may our actions be ripe with justice and love. And that's the Hebrew. Bishnat hashmitah hazot modim enachnu v'yodim shekol perot haaretz shemotzia hem lechol beroteha v'hefker lekulam ve'ein ba'ala tachat haboreh. I'll just read the last line. V'yu kol ma'asenu b'shelim, that means ripe, b'tzedek, with justice, uva'ahava, and with love. Yeah.
My sense is there is much more here to learn. Janice Gray wants to know about moss gardening, and so what we're going to do is have you talk about moss gardening after the service, and anyone who wants to know about moss gardening can hang around for a bit.
Okay.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, John. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Apologies from Jacob, who really wanted to be with you today. He's sorry he couldn't be, and I hope you come down to the farm and visit. Thanks.
It's right on the bike path in Northampton. Close our time together with a poem in recognition of Rosh Hashanah. To a new year that is good and sweet, with apples dipped in sticky honey, pomegranate seeds that stain, the true fruit that tempted Eve. And though we are imperfect, and like she we owe apologies, we may remain another year in this messy world. Surely given even God above must know a sweet beginning is a sacred need. And Kyle, if you go to Rabbi Seidenberg, we'll close.
Thank you all. I want to wish you all a sweet, whole, beautiful year. In Hebrew, we say Shana Tova, and for the Shemitah year, I'm saying Shana Tova u'mituka, a good and sweet year, mituka u'mitakenet, and a healing year for all of us. And I'm going to blow the shofar, which is our sound for the new year.
Thank you, Rabbi Seidenberg, and to all of us, go in peace.